there's one thing you can count on, that God is faithful. And everything that he's going to do, he will do. And what he promises to do, what he speaks to us, he's going to perform. His work, his life, his grace is going to be supplied in our spirit in order to do the thing that he wants to bring about. That unveiling, that purpose, that hope of glory, all those things are put into trust in him. Not us. We can't do anything. We can't perform these things. We can't be that beautiful bride, that full and holy bride. All we can do is submit to him, come to him and submit, humbly bow before him and say, God, I need you. I need your grace. I need you to supply that grace in my spirit. We're going to close up today. We're going to end this thought. And one of the things I want to talk about is, again, we've talked about these two kingdoms, these two rising kingdoms and maturing of the kingdoms of this at the end of the age, of how one is a lover of self and a lover of pleasure, and the other is a lover of God, that loves the things of God and really hungers for those things of God. One of the other two aspects that I really want to lay out is the one that we've talked a little bit about, but we're really going to dive into it this time in this session. But the humility that we give toward the Lord, the humility that we express toward the Lord, versus the pride that the bride of the Antichrist, that harlot of Babylon, expresses in the end times. One is humility, one is pride. One is arrogant, one is trusting and dependent. That dependency on God and the independency that says, I can do it myself. In the book of James, it says, this is going to be chapter 4, verse 6. It says, but he gives more grace. Therefore, he says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament, mourn, and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. Man, listen, when you talk about turn your joy into mourning, or your laughter into mourning, that blows your mind. You're like, well, that doesn't sound right. This is supposed to, the gospel should make me happy. The gospel should make me excited. And the cool thing about it is it does. It makes you, there's a superior pleasure in God, a superior pleasure in lowing the things of God. But there's also this contrast of mourning the things that aren't really of God. There's a loss in life. There's a loss and a cost, that what Paul says in Philippians chapter 3, the loss of all things. But he was okay with it. He was okay with losing those things of this life in order to gain the things of the eternal things. The things that when we talk about mourning, those things are lost, is because we've attached ourselves to a love of the world and a love of things of the world. When we humble ourselves, we give ourselves over to God, and we deny that whole Babylon mentality of doing things ourselves and building our own kingdom, building our own success, building our own and going after our own ambitions. We break off all those things. And we really do, like Jesus when he called his disciples, and we deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow him. We lose our lives so that we can gain life. We lose ourselves to gain him. When John the Baptist was talking about Jesus and how that difference in his ministry versus Jesus' ministry, he says, that Jesus has to increase and I have to decrease. He realized that expression of Jesus and his kingdom had to always outweigh our own ministries or our own lives or our own success. And speaking as a man, men are typically driven by success and by wanting to make a name for ourselves. And man, for me, just to give you a very, very brief 20-second testimony, I longed for making a name for myself and to going after those things that makes Richie look good, that makes me look good, that makes me successful, makes me happy. But what I found was when I deny those things and I get rid of those things, there's actually this superior pleasure in knowing God and being fulfilled in him in a deeper way. To actually experience God, experience his presence, and have him unveil himself or unwrap himself and express himself in a new way. That is what really life is all about. And when you talk about real life and experience in real life, that's where you receive it at. through the real expression and getting rid of all the old stuff and receiving the new stuff. So we've been talking about the two kingdoms, the two brides, the two kings. And again, they're centered on this humility versus pride. And when James talks about the resist that, God resists the proud. He will literally come against that nation, that harlot of Babylon. He will come against it with judgment. He will come down hard on it. But with the humble, he gives grace. And grace, man, grace is a very powerful thing. Grace is not cheap, like a lot of people make it out to be. It's not something that it's a ticket that you pull that says, oh, I can go to heaven because I filled out a card or anything like that. No, it's something much, much deeper. There is a great grace that God gives us that empowers us to work through and to walk through certain obstacles that we could not do on our own. When we walk in pride or self-righteousness and we try to walk out our own salvation with self-righteousness, and we don't go to the Lord in relationship and ask His Holy Spirit to really provide that deep change in our spirit to long to walk in holiness, then we will literally fail. We will walk so challenged by trying to be holy, trying to be good. If you just try to avoid the Ten Commandments, just the Ten Commandments, just try to follow those Ten Commandments in yourself. When you try to walk those out, you will fail miserably in those commandments. But when you ask for the Lord and you realize and you submit to Him in humility and you say, God, I can't do anything in myself. I need you. I need your presence. I need your supply. He gives us grace. That's called humbling ourselves, and that He gives us grace to those who are humble. What we'll see is these two kingdoms really battle with that. Battle with those two things. The church, the bride of Christ, will embrace that. And this other harlot of Babylon will reject that. It will want its own self-righteousness, its own pleasure, its own desires. So what will eventually happen is you'll see this maturing, and you'll see the king of Babylon and Satan and these judgments come down on the Antichrist, Satan, and his kingdom, the harlot of Babylon. So in Psalms 2, this is what it says. This is where you see the pride. Notice the pride, what we're talking about right here. We're going to talk about three different areas where the pride really gets pushed against God, and people reject God in such a way that you see that arrogance very blatant, very boldly. And one being, Satan himself, one being the Antichrist or the king of Babylon. And then you see it in the people who follow that harlot of Babylon. Those are the three expressions of that pride. But Psalms chapter 2 says, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against His anointed, talking about Jesus. Verse 3 says, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords. This is the people talking to God. Now that's craziness. So then verse 4 shows the Lord sitting on His throne, and it says He sits in the heavens and laughs, and the Lord holds them in derision, and then He will speak to them in His wrath and terrify them in His fury, saying, as for me, I will set my king on Zion, my holy hill, and I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son, today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them into pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O kings, be wise and be warned. O rulers of the earth, serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest He be angry and you perish in the way, for His wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in Him. Now, there's a lot there in that verse, man. Look at what's going on. You got this raging of the nations, raging of people, raging of rulers who literally look up at the Lord, look up at God and say, we don't need you. We don't need your type of leadership. And what you see is this response from the Lord, just laughing, saying, man, you don't have a choice in it. You don't have a choice in this. I'm going to release my son. My son's going to come and he's going to rule. And everybody that resists, he's going to dash like a potter's vessel. That's a very wild and crazy way to look at things when you see just how bold the nations and the rulers of these nations will be against a living God. When you see, in contrast, you see this intimacy where in verse 12 it says, kiss the Son lest he be angry. You'll see this this intimacy, not of a natural affection like we think of, but a spiritual affection that the church has for the Lord. And we will kiss the Son in the way of, this deep relationship, this deep affection, the things of God we long for. We want to experience God in that deep way. And that will not be the way of these rulers and their pride. They'll resist those things. They'll want to break off those things and push away against the things of God. Again, that's that maturing of the age where you see this deep intimacy of the people of God and holiness of God, and then this other group of people that really just want to do their own thing. Now, where does that come from? It comes from that heart of Satan. You know, Satan will speak into the Antichrist life. The Antichrist will rule from that same heart that Satan has. And what does that look like? Well, if you look at Isaiah chapter 14 verses 3 through about 23, there's a lot saying that's said there, but it talks about the king of Babylon, and there's judgments there about his pride and his arrogance, and then what God will do to resist that. And then also Lucifer's heart, where Lucifer extends his heart up and says, I want to do certain things. And one of the things that Lucifer says, and this is very eye-opening when you look at how our hearts, a lot of times, if we're not careful, we will relate to the way Satan thinks a lot of ways. And I know that's terrible for us to think about. We're like, oh no, that's not me. But listen, we got to be very careful that we don't walk in this pattern of the world, or this pattern of sin, Satan. And look what he says is, I will ascend into heavens. I will exalt my throne. I will sit on the mount of the congregation. I will ascend into the heights of the clouds, and I will be like the Most High God. These are all things that Satan says to God. He says it in his heart. His heart expresses these things. He wants to ascend himself. Without God's help, he wants to exalt himself into the heavens. He wants to exalt his throne, his ruleship. He wants to be lifted up. He wants to sit in the mount of the congregation, which is a position that only Jesus holds. Jesus sits there. Satan doesn't belong there, but he wants to be there. And then it says, I want to ascend to the heights of the clouds. I want to be like the Most High God. I want to be in that place of rule over all creation. That's what Satan wants. And he's wanting to lift himself up. And one of the things that when we see that in the Bible, where those who try to exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. That exaltation comes as we humble ourselves, because we don't really, when you really find true humility, you really don't desire to be something you're not. You don't desire for a purpose that wasn't given to you. My place isn't to be God. You know, when you realize that, when you realize it isn't my place to rule my own life, it is for God to come in, because he's a good shepherd, because he's a good God. He knows what's best. He's a lot smarter than me, a whole lot smarter. And he knows how to play out my life in a way that's the best way for me. He does it for me. And if I try to take that on, if I try to take on that responsibility, I want to make my life the best for me, and I say, well, this is what will be best for me, then we'll get it wrong every time. We'll find ourselves completely falling short of the glory and the beauty that God really has for our life. He's got this huge amount of glory, huge amount of expectation that he has for you for purpose, that he wants to extend to you and bring you up into this high place. But if we don't humble ourselves and say, God, only you can do it. Look at Abraham. Abraham, he tried to do something himself in pride, and it didn't work out for him. He had Ishmael. Ishmael had to be sent away. Ishmael didn't bring the inheritance that he wanted. But God brought Isaac. God initiated it. God brought it. God's ability, God's strength. And that's ultimately what we're leaning for, what we're going after. And the two dynamics, those two kingdoms, they will ultimately come down to those two things. That one will be completely submitted to the things of God, saying, God, your purpose is perfect. Your way is perfect. Your will and your heart is perfect. You are worthy for all of it. We give you everything. And this other nation that will try to take it all on themselves. Man, listen, don't get caught up in that. Go after the things of God. Humble yourself. Let him bring you up to the place you need to be.